We're back. I'll call the meeting back to order. We had a little coffee break in between the first part. And so, Steve, we thought we'd invite you over to give us the agency's input on 603. It's a House bill.
Yeah.
And we had the sponsor of the bill in the earlier today. And they thought everything was fine with you guys, but just to verify it and if you got any questions or things in regards to the chicken parks bill. And so I guess our general question is, does the agency have any issues with it?
Well, thank you, Senator. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having us. Steve Collier from the Agency of Agriculture. So the short answer is we are fine with the bill as it is. We did have some additional suggestions that the House Agriculture Committee decided not to adopt. But unlike some of the other on-farm slaughter issues that we've discussed, some of us have discussed in the past, this changing of the exemption does not violate federal law, so it doesn't create a preemption issue. This is something that's allowed under the Federal Poultry Parks Inspection Act. So that is a big difference from some of these issues that we've discussed. And so once you get past the fact that it's legal, which is always sort of a seminal issue, then it just comes to balancing the respective interests. And of course, we're always concerned about food safety, and that's what this implicates. When you don't have slaughter going through the inspected process, then you have potentially greater risks. We're also concerned about farmers being violent. And it does, in fact, it's more marketable for farmers to be able to sell, or potentially more marketable to be able to sell parted birds than whole birds. So in balancing those different interests, our biggest concern about what this could have done in the original version was could have allowed for cooking as well as selling raw parts. And if you're doing slaughter and processing in an environment that's not the most sanitary, one of the greatest risks, as I understand, foodborne pathogens, particularly Salmonella and Campylobacter, is temperature changes. So if you don't have a controlled setting when you're doing the slaughter and then the processing and the cooking, then you have a lot greater incidence of potentially getting food pathogens that can be very deleterious to people. So our principal recommendation, I would say, on that front was to keep this raw so that you could part the birds, but you still have to have them raw. Even in reality, every time you touch the chicken, every time you cut it, take additional step, like there's increased risk, because if you're not controlling the environment, then each cut, each place you move the chicken to store it during processing, all of that entails greater risk. So this is riskier than the current bill is, but we also believe that it's a manageable balance. And so the House adopted our request to make it raw rather than just parted poultry. So that takes the chicken pot pie sort of out of the scenario, which increases the risk if you're not doing it correctly. There were a couple of other things that we thought would have improved it as well that they didn't accept, but I think from our perspective, there are much more important issues in the legislature this year that need maybe some stronger positioning. But I think with this one, we're okay with the balance that the House committee struck. And I'll also throw out there that we've been working with rural Vermont on these issues for a long time, and it used to be quite contentious with some of the on-farm slaughter issues, and we kind of come back year after year, and they wanted to make some changes in state law that we really felt you couldn't do under federal law, and we encouraged them to go to Congress and to actually make the changes in a place where they could do it, and they've done that. We've been supporting them in that endeavor. So whether or not they'll get it through, remains to be seen, but this is something they also support, and it's legal. And I think we're very pleased that they're working the federal law where it can be worked, and that they're suggesting here something that allows farmers to have more options that still comports with federal law. So maybe more words than you needed, but I think overall we feel like this is a reasonable compromise.
I see there is some, refrigeration and frozen, that's all taken care of in here. So the farmer has to keep the chicken either refrigerated or frozen.
Yeah, there are existing, and I don't think any of those were changed, like the existing requirements are there. The one thing that we suggested that I think would have been nice, but again, we're okay with where we are, is that you, for farmers who fit under the 5,000 or the 20,000 bird exemption, they need to get a pre-approved label with us. They have to pre-approve it. For the smallest farmers under the 1,000 bird exemption, they do not. They have to label it, and in the label, the House committee adjusted the label in line with our recommendations, but they don't have to pre-approve it with us. So what that means is we don't know who these folks are a lot of times. So we can't give them education or guidance when we don't know who they are.
That's
So
under 1,000.
under 1,000, they don't need to get a pre-approved label with us. And so so we're there if they come to us, but we don't necessarily know who they are. And so we can't necessarily recommend that they follow the best practices. So that's one suggestion we had, which we thought, like, okay, let's loosen this up a bit, but it'd be great if people are coming to us to get their label approved so that we know who they are and we can both help them and, as necessary, also be able to respond to problems. So again, I don't think it's a huge issue, but it is something that we thought would get a little better.
Right, thanks for sharing. Is there any registration process that people need to go? This is more, you're gonna be able to do it. We're excited for, you're gonna be able to do it on your own, gonna go to the market. But there's not like, I'm doing it, let me leave,
So it varies, depending. So if what we want people to do is to be able to be licensed so that they can sell their poultry everywhere. And there's ways they can do that both in-state or they can do it interstate, so we're always trying to get people to the next level so that they can have the best success. But with these exemptions, there isn't a registration requirement, except for there is this pre-approved label for the 5,000 bird and the 20,000 bird exemption. So if they're following the law correctly, they're notifying us getting the label approved.
Okay.
For some of the on-farm slaughter, for beef and other for other animals, then there is actually a requirement that they notify us that they're doing it, so that we're aware of them. But for this 1,000 birds, there's no current requirement that they notify us what they're doing.
And would you remind me, the other on-farm slaughter stuff that we allow, is this sort of bringing?
No, this is separate because
That's
that's
complete, so it's not,
that's under the Federal Meat Inspection Act.
Okay.
And it's just a whole different set of issues that there's more permissive allowances for poultry than there is for meat and other products.
So is the labeling, once you hit 1,000, once you hit 1,001, then you have to do a particular, get your label approved?
They all need to have a label, but yes, if they do over 1,000 and up, I think, then they need to come to us and get the label pre-approved. So it's not a formal registration, but
Not
effectively.
5,000, that's 1,000.
Right, because if you're over 1,000, then you fit within that under 5,000 exemption. Yeah.
Right?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I'm just curious, why did they not adopt that if you are recommending that they do that?
I'm not certain. I think that we proposed sort of a series of changes that including defining what raw meant. So there's a definition in federal law called ready to cook poultry. And it explains what that means. And so we had suggested that along with some other changes. And I don't think the House Committee explained to me at least exactly why, but I think at least some of them were thinking it made it more complicated than they wanted, and they were really looking for simplicity. So instead of taking the language that we suggested, they just made it raw instead of defining what that meant. And again, overall, yes, we would have preferred the label requirement, but again, it's legal. And it's not, there's no label requirement now for the smaller ones. I mean, clearly we would have preferred, because you are increasing the risk by cutting out the birds than you are when you just sell a whole one. But it's not something that we think that would be better, but it's not something that we are passionate about.
So the word raw should be defined.
Well, I mean, it's not defined currently. I think it sort of speaks for itself in most ways. If you cook it, it's no longer raw, but what we were,
If you only cook it halfway,
well, and they're ready to cook.
we've all, we've all had chicken at different places.
You studied in the, so blood runs out, you can do it.
We'll have you.
No.
We'll keep cooking and when it gets to, so you're happy, we'll call that.
And then I wanna keep you safe.
Mr. Chair, may I ask, and we're talking all poultry here, right? We're not talking just chicken, we're talking ducks, everything.
This is poultry,
So it's,
yeah,
so,
Poultry's defined somewhere too.
poultry is defined,
Okay.
yeah, I wouldn't wanna, I haven't looked at the.
So duck farm, turkey farm, same.
Anything that fits within the exemption, yes.
Okay.
Nice. That's good clarification.
Any other questions for Steve?
Pretty simple.
Yeah, I guess. Someone may ask though, what's raw meat?
Yeah, well, we'll,
What's that definition?
we'll try to get a definition put in here. And then that'll clarify that. And you know, as long as, I don't mind it's peak but at least their labels approved. And they gotta have them anyway, so why not have them get approved labels? And then they can keep track of who's doing chicken. Do they get a number on their label or their return address gotta be on there or something?
The label has, there's 4 requirements. I think it's name, address, and one thing that was added in this bill is
The name of the product.
type of product, because with the whole bird, you don't really need to do that, but yeah.
So I'm just thinking at a fairly large farmer's market, you could have 2 people selling raw poultry products. One of them would have an agency label on their stuff and the other one wouldn't. And I could see that causing some confusion to people that are walking down, saying, well, why is that label on here, but it's not over here?
It's not a department label, is it?
I don't believe so. I think it's just something we have to pre-approve as adequate, and we have some sample labels that we can share with people to make it easier for them. But it doesn't say, I don't believe, Agency of Agriculture, because it's not something that we're actually,
Okay.
right, we're not inspecting the product, and so we wouldn't want to give the impression that we are. When we are inspecting the product, there is that. With this, it's just, I think that the idea of sending the label to us is to make sure that the disclaimer, we want people to know they're buying uninspected poultry. So they understand, and I believe restaurant menus need to have that same sort of disclaimer, so you know that you're buying something that's not from an inspected facility, so there is potentially a greater risk.
See, and the only thing I'm thinking is if we don't keep track of who has a label and the difference between A and B farmer. So you go to the farmer's market and there are 2 people there, like Brian said, selling chicken. And take it home, whatever you do. And you end up getting sick from the chicken. Well, they're gonna complain to somebody. Are they gonna say that label? Who's gonna know where the chicken came?
Well, that's a great, and I'm not completely familiar with the process, but I know that certain illnesses, when Vermont hospitals or providers identify them, they need to report those to the Department of Health. And then the Department of Health actually does an investigation trying to find the source. And whether they can or not is a very different question and begs your question. That point is, but they do interview people, and I know this, they will interview people and ask them what they've eaten, where they've been, what they've done. First, I think the time period varies depending on what they find, but they do try to, and that's exactly a key reason for the label. is so that you actually know, ideally, you know, and if you go to a farmer's market, hopefully you know who you're buying from, but some people don't. But that, you're right, that's a weakness though when you go into the grocery store too. You know?
Well, I get home, occasionally I cook, not very often.
You cook it all the way or halfway?
Well, in the summer, I always burn that.
All the way.
But in the summer, when you're grilling and you take the chicken out and thaw it, first thing you do is take the label off.
Yeah.
And at home, that goes in the trash can, the label and all that. Well, then you cook it, you eat it, and then the next day, if the trash is already gone and out, and oh God, it had to be that chicken, and you go try to find the label.
And you're digging in the garbage.
I mean, that's never happened, but I'm just thinking about the process you go through.
To know where you got that bird.
Yeah, and how you open it. And it's got that little styrofoam
Yeah.
pad, and that has to go in the garbage
Yeah.
or junk because they won't take it at recycle.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that's,
Save the labels, till you feel good.
yeah.
But that's
So,
the label, right?
I'm
PFAS,
wondering
was that
about
PFAS?
the
that we
label
kept our
for
chicken
the
in?
little guys,
Oh.
would even matter.
You got me all worried now.
It's a little, I mean, part of our biggest reason, thinking behind it was just to make sure that we could be, the people knew what they needed to do and that they can, because our staff is, really likes to train people and to talk to them about how, and they like to get them to the next step where they can be, instead of selling 1,000 birds, hopefully selling 10,000 birds, so.
Yeah.
So it was more of a, it's more of a thought that we could get them in the door and give them education if they need it and or are receptive to it.
Yeah. Well, we can think about that over the break and talk with you again. Yeah. Other questions for Steve at the present? Well, that definition of wrong, maybe you could, if there is a definition or if there isn't, bring us one after we get back.
I mean, there is that ready to cook definition, I would say, and I know this is a different issue, but the House Agriculture Committee didn't like it. So I don't know, and we can provide that, or we could try to come up with something else, I don't.
I don't know what that ready to cook is.
It's just a federal definition that's used, so the idea was we'd use one that's already existing, and it's not widely. I don't think it's widely implemented, but it just exists, and what, from our perspective, what it more importantly did is say what you have to remove from the bird, and I can't remember now exactly what that was, but there are certain parts of the bird that are not edible. And you don't want them to be potentially in the bird, so it's just kind of a way of saying, this is what, don't give them the gizzard, or maybe the gizzard you could give them, I don't even remember now, but.
I like chicken feet.
So,
On
chicken-
a Chinese restaurant in Montreal. I don't know.
Like the Christmas Story, you ever see the movie?
So
Yes.
chicken parts default
I don't think they are.
because
That was that was sort of the impetus. I don't think the poultry products are defined, but it's pretty broad. I don't believe that the parts themselves are defined in current statute.
And it's certainly not the bill.
no, and there's some, like you said, there's some parts that should take a hike.
Yeah, and certainly from the whole bird, they're there as well, so it's not,
So it wouldn't be any different.
I think there's probably been some variance. Whole bird wasn't defined, so I don't think people were necessarily putting the head in the bag, but.
People for life vacations.
It's not gizzard, parts of gizzard, delicious.
Okay, sorry, it's me.
I'll make you soup and bring it in.
Well, Other questions?
No,
No, thank you.
no, thanks.
Well, thank you all.
Thanks for skipping over.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, appreciate it.
No, thanks for all you're doing.
Yeah,
Busy session.
We'll get back on to the rest of the break.
I'll send you a
Okay.
recipe, delicious.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
See you.
Bye. Have a good day.
Still got the chair.
Yeah.
So,
Are we done?